Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Welcome to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. I'm Kelly Misher-Collins with the Diocese of Des Moines. And today's show, we're visiting with Dr. Lydia Dugdale, author of the book, The Lost Art of Dying, Reviving Forgotten Wisdom. Dr. Dugdale is Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of the Center for Clinical Medical Ethics at Colombia University. And she's founding co-director of the Program for Medicine, Spirituality, and Religion at the Yale School of Medicine. But before we get to today's interview, let's find out what's on the Bishop's mind.
Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
So still buoyed up by our great celebration of Divine Mercy at Christ the King.
Yes.
Many people gathered from the area, and I'm sure there were marvelous celebrations as well. But that great devotion, St. Faustina, but the devotion to Jesus and the person of Jesus, both crucified and his body gloriously raised up. And 50 days to absorb that. And actually, our author kind of makes reference to one facet of that Paschal mystery that we want to draw her out in the course of her book. She speaks about the depiction of the crucifixion as well. But so we're in the midst also of confirmation season, one of the great graces. So we'll be at Corpus Christi in Council Bluffs tomorrow, and St. Patrick's in Missouri Valley, and Sunday back at the Mother Church of the Diocese, St. Ambrose, and then St. Patrick and Perry. And then the following week, St. Patrick and Council Bluffs. So St. Patrick's getting a lot of play the following week. But that's beautiful. And Mother's Day. Mother's Day this Sunday. So we honor all mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, godmothers, and those women who've been spiritual mothers to us. Are you doing anything for your mom? Or
actually, we're going to be in the Holy Land, so I will not be here.
We'll pray for your mom at the Church of the Annunciation.
That's right. I will pray for her. I will send her messages, and she can follow along on Facebook.
I think she'll appreciate that.
I think she'll enjoy
making
that.
a spiritual pilgrimage with you.
Yeah, we do a lot of posting, so it'll be
blessings
good.
to you that you had that opportunity. May you be safe and everything.
Yes, I'll have to ask for a travel blessing later.
Yeah, so you've got all your proper documentation and everything else.
We do. I got a pack, but yes.
Yeah, well, we'll all try to honor our moms, and, I guess my mom would probably prefer I not talk about her on the radio, but she's her buoyant spirit, lifting up our family every day with prayer and her incisive comments and observations, too, and her great wit, which always surprises you as well, but that's a marvelous thing. So we're anticipating our author, Dr. Dugdale, who's going to be with us in a moment. And I'd just like to, in the spirit of the resurrection, kind of set the table a little bit. When we think, and I'm indebted to Patrizio and his reflections on this, that the resurrection of Jesus is the opposite of the reanimation of a corpse. And he kind of has a thought experiment where the physician who has the power to revive a dead person, and Dr. Dugdale talks about the kind of the aggressive medical treatments that, that ignore or steamroll through DNR orders. But then that embarrassing question that someone might ask, well, now, doctor, to whom shall I dedicate my life? You decided I should do another tour of duty, and no doubt you have a good reason. Before I was alive, just like that, without any reason, but that was the movement of life. But now you're making me live. You must have some explanation. And so, kind of pacified and everything else, but then succumbs to death again, and again is revived by the physician who takes him down after perhaps a self-induced death and reanimates him and says, really, sir, you should not be so ungrateful for the benefits of science. But then couldn't your science, which provides me with this extra longevity, tell me the meaning that goes with it? Forgive my stubbornness, a reanimated human is tougher than a mere mortal. But either there's a meaning it is worth giving my life for, or else there is none. And then why shouldn't I kill myself? But immortality, isn't immortality good? You want to immortalize your stupidity. I don't blame you. Otherwise, you'd be completely stupid. And so this kind of back and forth, again, in this imaginary repartee between the physician, and that ultimately that is unable to supply the meaning. And so we can see where the tendency toward physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia can happen in our efforts to control and determine and supply it when it's not. If it's only human-generated, then ultimately our finitude will prevail. And so that way in which we might ultimately euthanize someone whom he's been snatched from the jaws of death. And so obviously Dr. Dugdale will take us in a different direction, a much more sanguine, hopeful, and upbeat, even as she looks at it from a cool clinical eye.
Sounds good. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll visit with Dr. Lydia Dugdale. You're listening to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
Hello, this is Steve Ray, inviting you to join me for Iowa Catholic Radio's 15th anniversary pilgrimage to the Holy Land, November 11th through the 20th, 2023. We'll have Mass at St. Peter's House, take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, and enjoy a special dinner with the atmosphere of a Bedouin tent. Not all pilgrimages are created equal. Don't miss the Iowa Catholic Radio's 15th anniversary Holy Land pilgrimage. Details at iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Knights of Columbus, Borman and Pfeiffer Agencies, serving the Catholic families in Iowa. The Knights of Columbus is a fraternal benefit society providing financial security to members and their families, specializing in life insurance, long-term care insurance, disability income insurance, and retirement annuities. And you can reach Knights of Columbus field agent Rob Ryan at 563-689-6801. That's 563-689-6801. Thank you, and God bless.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. On today's show, we're visiting with Dr. Lydia Dugdale, author of the book, The Lost Art of Dying, Reviving Forgotten Wisdom. Dr. Dugdale is Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of the Center for Clinical Medical Ethics at Columbia University and founding co-director of the Program for Medicine, Spirituality, and Religion at the Yale School of Medicine.
Good morning, Dr. Dugdale. Thank you for making time out of your busy schedule to be with us here this morning on the show. We briefly were trying to maybe play any connections we might have in the small world. So the genre of your book, The Lost Art of Dying, Reviving Forgotten Wisdom, takes its place, in both historically, art of dying in a medieval way, but even more contemporary literature by folks like Sherwin Newland, Daniel Sulmacy, I think of Thomas Lynch, the Mortician, The Undertaking, and others as well. So were you kind of already steeped in that kind of humanistic culture or aware of some of those works and as inspiration or even in your professional associations?
Yeah, definitely some of those names are well known to me. Medicine, we have our daily inspiration in mortality just by the work we do. But as we reflect on death, as I have reflected on death over the course of my career and reflected on what it means to live well as to die well, I've read and interacted with several of the names you just mentioned. So Dr. Daniel Sulmacy is a good friend and mentor to me. Has a few years ahead of me and has kind of brought me up a little bit in medicine and in the medical humanities, as well as thinking about questions of living and dying well. And certainly Sherwin Newland was a colleague at Yale, and others. So a lot of overlap in the small world of academic medicine. Beautiful,
beautiful unfolding and flowering of this kind of deep reflection about ultimate questions. And you set the table, and I was almost kind of, okay, where's she going to go with this? As you talked about in your initial chapter about the persistent efforts to resuscitate a man who best maybe had been left to run his natural course of life and the kind of aggressiveness and assertiveness. And you said that this is sometimes correlated with folks who are, very strongly religious. That what might seem that the acceptance of death, actually it's kind of counterintuitive. Is that something that kind of plays out in the studies?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I talk in the book about studies that some colleagues of mine at Harvard have performed. The leaders on the study are Christians, actually, and they're interested in why it is that some groups of people tend to prefer to die in the hospital in sort of highly medicalized ways, so perhaps in the intensive care unit, or refusing the tools of hospice and palliative medicine. And in their initial study, they found that folks who describe themselves as well supported by their religious communities are, and in their study in the greater Boston area happen to be from largely Christian communities, Christian churches, that these folks ended up preferring to die in the intensive care unit. And so they did a follow-up study to try to interrogate this. Why is it that highly religious people who have, well worked out theologies of the afterlife are clinging to the tools of modern medicine? They're clinging to the intensive care unit. And they found some interesting things, which is, I think most notably that clergy are the ones who are often called in to help patients and their families parse out what makes sense during the dying process. And clergy in their efforts, their well-intentioned efforts not to take away hope from the dying, they often overstate the benefits of particular interventions and understate the harms. And so you end up with, it's a sort of the glass is half full kind of approach to medicine, except that people are dying. And so then we have to sort of step back and say, well, if we have a well worked out theology of the afterlife, if any hope in this current world is a far inferior hope to that which awaits, why is it that we cling so ardently to the mechanical ventilator and to the chemotherapy and to these things that ultimately offer no lasting hope, right? So it's interesting. I think it's really interesting for myself as a person of faith, but also interfacing with patients who are people of faith, to keep these studies on the table as we think about what makes sense as we approach our corporeal ends.
Yeah, I would look for an opportunity to visit with my own brother priests in the diocese, because I think that's a healthy caution for us all, that we don't overextend our competence, in terms of some of those medical analyses. I think we can be part of those and should be part of the conversations as we, look at the proportionate benefits and burdens. But, we're laymen in that respect. And so, I think we want to defer that. But no, it is the ultimate horizon that we bring, and maybe our own attitudes cultivated in our own lives as well. So I'm coming up on the 4th anniversary of my own father's passing. He ultimately succumbed to myasthenia gravis, and it was in many ways a beautiful death. His decline was very rapid and spent much of the last week. But someone had shared with me that it takes families maybe about 48 hours to really absorb the fact that their loved one is dying, actively dying, perhaps. And I look back and I'd say, yeah, that's true for me too. So there was even that temptation to say, do everything we can for Dad. Get him through this crisis so we can enjoy him again. Is that 48 hour? Does that kind of resurface among the studies?
It's interesting. It's the first I've actually heard the 48 hours. I'll say that even as a physician working in these kind of high-powered institutions for my whole career, I still have a skepticism of my own about trusting colleagues I don't know when it comes to my own loved ones. So I also feel, especially if I can't be in the hospital and I'm not privy to all of the data that another doctor might have about, a relative of my own, I'm always a little bit suspicious, right? I think this is human nature. We don't want to give up too soon. We don't want to throw in the towel inappropriately. And so I think human nature is that we push a little bit longer. And so if that's 48 hours, I can believe it. I think that certainly aligns with what I personally have experienced as a family member of patients.
Wow. And then you kind of express the professional corollary to, as priests, we often say, well, who would I want as a pastor taking care of my family? The same thing for folks in the health professions also. So your book is really a tour de force. You weave in and out of literature and philosophy and spirituality. There's very many things that were very instructive for me, particularly in kind of elaborating some of the Jewish spirituality surrounding death and all that. But then also that kind of tenaciousness that can creep into all of this. And, you cite Camus' Plague and other works and the influence that it had as well. The importance of community, the importance of having community, the phenomena of people dying alone, not only in Asia and other places, but that this is going to be ever more prevalent with us as our population ages.
Yes, no, that's right. It's a big problem. It's something that many of us who are interested in these issues are talking about. And here in New York City, where there's a group of us who are actively trying to reimagine care of the sick, the vulnerable, the shut-ins, and the dying. What would it look like for us, perhaps across congregations? Because congregations pull from all parts of the city. What would it look like for us, Catholics and Protestants, and even perhaps Orthodox, to care for those in our neighborhood so that there aren't kind of isolated individuals dying alone? we're in the early stages of sort of imagining this, but I agree with you. It's going to be absolutely a growing problem as the population ages and people become more and more isolated. And of course, the world is more globalized, so people are moving all over. And the call to address social isolation and loneliness is one that we really all must heed, because community has always been essential to dying well. And in fact, some of the best ways that we learn how to die well are in the context of community. So, yeah, I'm with you there.
Okay. The whole sense of the work that one must do, the kind of spiritual work and relationships, and how going into a hospital can be a kind of antagonistic to allowing one to perform that spiritual work, and how different sensibilities are present. You kind of have Susan Sontag as a person, kind of the paradigm of someone who was totally death was anathema in so many ways, and a kind of combative almost in her, that versus that attitude of acceptance that is there, and how Simone Weil, kind of talks about affliction and all that's there. You're partial to a poet, I believe, Christian Wiman, do I say, who's kind of distinguished himself. Can you tell what the influence that he's had in shaping your own view?
Christian Wiman is interesting. He's he's really an incredible poet, but he himself carries a diagnosis of an incurable form of cancer. And so as a relatively young man, I would say probably maybe late 40s or early 50s at this point, with a couple of young children and a wife, he sort of carries around this diagnosis, and it affects the way he writes. And of course, he's a brilliant poet who I think in many ways experiences some sort of divine, not quite sure how he would put it, but his process of writing poetry is very much receiving from outside himself. And I think he was someone who grew up in, I believe, West Texas, in quite a conservative Protestant family, and sort of left the faith, but through his illness and writing, had such profound experiences of God that it brought him back to faith. So I find him a compelling interlocutor. Plus, I had the privilege when I was at Yale to take a class of his. While I was on faculty at the medical school, I took a class
in your spare time. In your spare time.
I know. It was too good to pass up.
Yeah, no, the privileged opportunity.
Really learned to appreciate poetry from him. But yeah, he brings this richness of experience and depth of suffering that many writers can't bring to their work because they just haven't been there, and that combined with, of course, with the faith commitments makes for fascinating read of his work and incorporation into my own work.
Oh, thank you. Now, in terms of visual imagery, the word imagery that Christian Wiman presents to us, and that blending of inspiration and his own craft. But you devote some time to your encounter with the Eisenheim altarpiece in Colmar, France, Grunewald's masterpiece, and the impact that it had, and whether we're talking, is it ergot or ergo poisoning, and how that figures into that.
We say ergot.
Yeah, ergot. Yeah. How, can you relate that to our listeners?
Yeah,
it's hard to, I'm sure, in a couple of minutes to do that. But
right. So much to pack in. So my book I wrote for my patients. I'll say that it's a book on the preparation for death, and it sort of takes from this idea of the art of dying genre of literature that developed during the aftermath of the mid-1300s bubonic plague outbreak. So when I was telling a friend of mine about that I'm writing on this art of dying that developed during the aftermath of the plague, she said, "Oh, you have to go see the Eisenheim altarpiece because it was dedicated to sufferers of the plague as well as sufferers of something called St. Anthony's fire, which, in the late Middle Ages, no one really understood. But now we believe it to have been a kind of psychosis that was due to this fungus that would grow on rye grain. And so when the climate was just right and there was just enough humidity, fungus, a toxic kind of fungus would grow on rye grain. And it had the effect on consumers that LSD, the psychedelic drug LSD, has on people who ingest that. And so people would behave if they consumed enough, right? So then this would depend on who was eating large amounts of rye and who was getting enough of the toxin. But what began to develop were outbreaks of something called the dancing plague, which was also this St. Anthony's fire, which is also this fungus poisoning, right? All different names for the same thing. And people would dance incessantly, sometimes for days. They would dance until they had heart attacks or until their feet were bloodied. And then they would also just behave erratically in other ways. This fungus poisoning, this LSD-like trip, is thought to be due to constriction of the blood vessels. So the blood, you're getting blood cut off to different parts of your body, and it's causing you to contort and to behave.
And Doctor, we're coming
ways.
up about a minute toward our break here. So just, the move. Yeah, it's very fascinating. But so the altarpiece.
Yeah, so the altarpiece was to the victims of this plague. And what the Antonites, who were the order that commissioned the altarpiece, they were also known as carers of the sick, particularly of plague victims and victims of St. Anthony's fire, and they would prescribe viewing of the altarpiece to the sick for whom they cared. So they would bring them into the choir area of the chapel, and they would give them bread that had been dipped in a sort of wine that into which St. Anthony's relics had also been dipped. And then there in the choir area, the sick would meditate on the suffering of Christ.
So we've entered the choir area, and we're going to pause there in a meditative moment and come back. Thank you very much, Dr. Dugdale.
You listen to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by the Sarah Vocations Ministry, including the St. Sarah Club of Des Moines and the Sarah Club of Council Bluffs. Sarah is an apostolate of the Worldwide Catholic Church dedicated to fostering and supporting priesthood and religious vocations. Sarahs strive to accomplish their mission through prayer, fellowship, and service to the bishop, priests, sisters, and all in religious formation, and in doing so to increase their own holiness. Learn more at joinsarah.org, joinserra.org. Thank you, Sarahs, for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Iowa Catholic Radio welcomes Scotty McCreery with special guest Ali Colleen. Sunday, July 24th at the Iowa Event Center Ballroom. Tickets and information available at celebratecountry.org. Sponsored by Ball Team.
Welcome back to Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen. We are back with Dr. Lydia Dugdale.
So images, as often the combination of the infirmary and the chapel and things like that. There's something a little bit prescriptive in that way, also for the Grunewald altarpiece. It's Doctor. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I'll just say one more thing, and that is in the main image of the altarpiece, which was the one that most viewers saw most of the time, was Christ, the crucified Christ on the cross. But what's so fascinating about it is that his body on the cross is riddled with the diseases to which the altarpiece was dedicated, to those who suffered from these diseases. So you see a Christ who's kind of bearing the scourge of St. Anthony's fire on his body, which made it very relatable for the sick to see him suffering. It'd be as if lepers were seeing Christ with leprosy, with that sort of phenomenon. Wow. So very powerful for the sick, and certainly, raises questions for us today about the power of art in all of its forms to help meet the needs of the sick.
And how the various profiles of Christ, and the suffering servant. We'll wonder if there'll be some art generated with COVID-19 depicting the crucifixion. We'll see what kind of inspiration is there.
Yeah,
but there are those who would like to dissociate themselves from any kind of explicit religious imagery. And you touch on that a little bit, the spiritual but not religious phenomena, and how people kind of generate their own spirituality, but over and apart from organized religion.
That's right. Again, I wrote this book for my patients, the majority of whom probably aren't religious. And so it's important to me in my care of dying patients to name that, there are no atheists in foxholes, that when people are getting close to the ends of their lives, they ask all kinds of questions about belief. And maybe if they've contented themselves with being spiritual but not religious, or being atheists or agnostics, that when the end is approaching, many of my patients have become much more anxious and less content, sort of staying in a space that is, not really committed to any particular belief system. And so part of what I'm trying to do is nudge people to think and to prepare well before the end, because patients I've cared for who are actively dying and then questioning their existential commitments or their faith commitments, it's often too late at that point. So part of my work is to try to get people to do this thinking and preparation well in advance of the moments when they are actually dying.
Oh, that's a great gift of the holistic care that you provide. I think of a philosopher of whom I'm fond, Robert Spaman, and he talks about humans are the only creatures that are become capable of their death. And he's not saying controlling and being the actual agents of death, but embracing that in a holistic way. The Jewish aspect of this kind of spiritual proposal that you might hold up to your patients includes this notion of vandalized shalom. And I thought a very beautiful description of the whole surrounding, what would be maybe main, Orthodox Judaism. But can you tell us about that concept and what that means?
Yeah, so vandalized shalom is a term that a friend of mine uses. So shalom, of course, is this word in Hebrew meaning peace, but it's not just peace as we think of it. It's this robust, deep, profound peace that sort of penetrates all of these different layers of who we are and human existence and the world, right? Shalom is so much more than, the peace of a peace treaty or, I don't know, a hippie, right? And so vandalized shalom then is this recognition of really the brokenness of this world, and but also with the promise that it will be redeemed, right? That the fix, the cure will come. Just thinking. Read so much this weekend about Zelensky in Ukraine. As a Jewish man, promising the resurrection, right? Yeah. Promising the resurrection as there's so much death around them.
Yeah.
So.
And the actual singing of the body, I think, of the Threshold Singers. The book holds so much more, references to Aretha Franklin, John McCain's death, the emphasis accent on palliative care compared to other clinical outcomes. I commend it to our listeners, and I thank you, Dr. Dugdale, for taking time for us.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
This has been another edition of Making It Personal with Bishop Joensen.
You can hear Making It Personal with Bishop William Joensen every week on Iowa Catholic Radio and iowacatholicradio.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and Making It Personal is provided by Sarah Vocations Ministry. Learn more at joinserra.org.